Hello and welcome to this movie night review of All or Nothing Manchester City. I'll start by just describing what it is. So what it is essentially an Amazon Prime series. They went behind the scenes during last season of Manchester City. For those that don't know, that's the season that Manchester City broke pretty much all of the records that a football team can break. You know, most goals, most points, most wins in a row, etc., etc. Amazon Prime was so lucky that they got that season in particular. You obviously couldn't have guessed that. And yeah, so this is essentially a sort of behind the scenes kind of documentary about that season. I should mention that I believe that All or Nothing has been done about other teams in the US. I've not watched any of those series, but you know, this isn't just a Manchester City thing from what I gather. So essentially, I'll go through sort of my issues first with the series. So overall, actually, I think that it's a decent series. For me, they could have done more with it. It slightly disappoints. I think that, and I'll go into my issues. I think it's just a bit too dramatized. I think they've tried to make it too watchable for the neutral. I think that, or you know, someone that maybe doesn't follow football or doesn't have an interest in football, I think you can really tell that it's something that's out of something that there's a lot of other sports that have had this same treatment, and that really is a shame. You know, I think it was a great opportunity to show this is very possibly the most memorable, if not one of the most memorable seasons in English football. Let's just showcase that and make it for the slightly more specific audience, but still obviously a massive audience of people that are into the Premier League and Man City. But instead, I think they've gone for pretty much everyone. You could probably watch this and enjoy it, even if you don't even like football. And for me, that's just a bit of a shame. I think it would have been a better piece of work if it was something different to that, in my opinion. So I'll go on to say what I'm really talking about when I mean this, and that is, I just think that they try and make it really like a story. You know, I think they add in plots that really weren't even there. So, for example, the Benjamin Mendy, especially, I think the first two episodes are considerably worse than the last six. Maybe it's just that I got used to that series because I had really high expectations going into it, but that's what I think. I think the first two episodes, Mendy gets so much airtime, and obviously I think it was interesting to provide that alternative. You know, it is quite often forgotten the struggle that football players go through when they have injuries. But obviously Benjamin Mendy, he played like 3 games of actual competitive football, 3.5 games it might be, for Man City, and then he got injured. So in terms of the season, and what we really want to know about how Guardiola operates and all that kind of thing, or at least obviously I accept that some of that would be limited because of the club, but that ultimately is what we really want to see in this specific season. But they try to give a subplot, you know, make a sob story out of it, and that kind of thing, and I just sort of didn't really sort of buy into that. I think similarly, the first Manchester derby, I mean, I very rarely agree with Mourinho, but he is bang on like that for the cover of that. I don't know if it was specifically that I was talking about, but in his criticism of the documentary, making out him and Man United be the baddies, I mean, it was pathetic. Like, I'm no fan of Mourinho, Man United. I hate the club, and I don't really like his style. But I mean, come on, they aren't actually the international baddies of football. Like, there's plenty of reasons that, you know, they're just another club that I, you know, and many other people personally sort of don't like because of their allegiances. But the way that they make them out as this is Park the Bus, you know, defensive, negative football versus the positive, great Manchester City. It's just so overly dramatised, and I really don't think it needed that. Like, the story of Man City season, not even in a documentary, on paper in a boring book, is enough to be interesting. So why you would need to add in a sort of completely artificial sort of drama and storyline is really ridiculous. Just one other thing to mention, they also do that in the latter bits where Man City obviously struggled. They had that really tough week where in the space of a week they lost those 3 matches, Derby being one of them, 2 of them being the Champions League matches. Now obviously that was bad, but the way they present the match against Spurs is just a bit ridiculous. The way they show it is in Manchester City are up against all odds, and you know, everyone's doubting them. They need to reaffirm they win the title. I mean, at this point in time, I think City was something like 15 points clear, or I don't know, somewhere definitely above 10. Like, there was absolutely no doubt. In fact, they won the title the day after the Spurs win, so there was no doubt in any way at that point that City would win the league. So to present that as being up against it again, it's just completely artificial, and it wasn't what this series was. This wasn't really a season of that much struggle. There were difficult moments, and I think maybe if they'd presented that, with the Wigan as sort of the hiccups, and show that, there were downsides to the season. Obviously, that's true. That would have been great. But the way they try and show it as in, Man City coming over the odds and all that kind of thing, and it's such drama and that kind of thing. It was just really overdone and really unnecessary. And so, my general issue with this series is, why could it not have just been what City's season was? Why could it not have just been, this is how they, or obviously not entirely, because as I've said, I think there would have been limitations, but this is what City was, this is how they did it, this is some of the details of Guardiola, some of which they did provide really well. I really liked, for example, the detail that they provided. So I believe it's conversation between Guardiola and I think it's Mikel Arteta, or at least one of his assistants, in the room that they do all the team talks, before the matches. And he talks about how Sterling had the issues after the Burnley match where he missed a good few chances. That's really good insight in my opinion. I think the series deserves to be praised for that. It's certainly not a wholly bad series like a lot of people have been made out. Similarly, I think it's quite funny. I think it was a nice little extra to throw in the bit of hide and seek and the security man who's responsible for Man City, and the players and the security of the players. I thought that was just quite a funny little bonus when they show how seriously these things are taken. But yeah, so I think that from that perspective there were some really good details. But yeah, I think that they sort of just missed some massive opportunities. I think that rather than trying to portray, they even tried to portray the match that Mendy got injured in as the sort of struggle, and obviously Benjamin Mendy did get injured, but they won 5-0 at home. It was absolutely a routine win, but they're sort of showing this is a struggle, but Manchester City go on to win 5-0. It just wasn't. And there's just absolutely no need for that kind of thing. Obviously it's different. It's not a season of highs and lows in the way that some others will be. Maybe if you were to look at, the standard promotion season, but it's definitely unique in how successful it was and how good the football was. So, yeah, I think in general, the whole dramatisation of it, and maybe it's something that's to be expected, but I just really think that it would have been a great, great documentary that would have really sort of been something that everyone could look on as an exceptional piece of work. It's got exceptional ratings, interestingly, but I've seen a lot of other criticisms. I've seen pieces against it. I think that it's quite an interesting documentary. It certainly is entertaining, you can't dispute that, and I certainly wouldn't say that it's rubbish. I've seen some criticisms, I think, that go too far. For example, I think that sometimes they try and dig out everything from the players, but for me, there just isn't that much in this, or there's not enough in the series, at least, that's exclusive to the series. I think that obviously, especially also when you hear about the players talking about what it was like and how they say that, it was awkward at first. This definitely was a series that was different to anything else. It wasn't just your standard interview, because obviously there's nothing weird or awkward about that. So, with all the access they had, I think they maybe just could have been more insightful, more analytical, and more based around City's season. And for me, they just really dramatise it too much. So that's my criticism. So I'd sum it up as entertaining, but overall a bit of a missed opportunity. So overall, if I was to rate it out of 5 stars, I'd probably still give it 2.5 stars. I think ultimately the main coup of this series is the fact they even got to film it. The fact they got behind the scenes in Man City, and they were so lucky that when they got behind the scenes in Man City, it was the season that they had. But with everything beyond that, with the exception of a couple of details, it was a missed opportunity and they could have done more. Anyway, if you've seen the series, what do you think? Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.